Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in this video I'm going to talk about the GCD and GCD changes in the context of an interview that Ian Hazzikostas did with Sloot, which you should check out. I'll have a link to it in the description below as well. Very informative interview. Here's the Wowhead summary of that, which I'll also link in the description below, where Sloot asked if there were going to be any updates to the GCD changes, and Ian said, you know, some of these individual examples are good ones to give feedback on, but basically they're going to stick to their philosophy of the GCD, of more abilities being on the GCD in Shadowlands than there were back in previous expansions, following along in the same direction that BFA went. So let's talk a little bit about how we got to this point and why this is a decision that was made by Blizzard. Back in the day, you used to have these macros that would like pop, you know, 5 cooldowns all at once, including like trinkets and racials and everything, along with multiple class abilities, and they would all be off the global cooldown. You'd pop them all at once, and then you'd also like immediately use an offensive ability as well. And this was powerful. You know, you felt really good pressing that button, and it did some instant damage, and that was cool. But Blizzard has a problem with this, where they don't want people to be required to make these macros to be successful. It's a bit of a barrier for newer players, and if they want this game to reach out to new people or whatever, or if they just it's just annoying to make macros for everybody, and so they decided to bring the gameplay to a more tactical level and put everything on this GCD basically. So with a few exceptions, they put most abilities now on the global cooldown, including big cooldowns. They've walked this back a little bit during BFA. So for instance, Ignore Pain was on the global cooldown at the start of BFA for Prot Warriors. And in patch 8.1, they walked that back a little bit, and that was a big increase to not just how strong Prot Warrior was, but making it feel like the spec was somewhat reasonable to play. Now, there are still some tank abilities that are on the GCD. Frenzied Regeneration, Light of the Protector, Fiery Brand, Death Strike, and to me, those are not all the same. To me, some of those should be coming back off the GCD as well. So let's talk a little bit about Light of the Protector. Prot Pallies have Light of the Protector, which is an ability they can cast on like a 15-second haste-reduced cooldown that heals themselves based on their missing health. But the problem with it being on the global cooldown is that all of the other abilities on the global cooldown are proactive defensive abilities. So when you have a reactive defensive ability and a bunch of proactive defensive abilities also on the global cooldown, the problem you have here is, in addition to sometimes just wanting to press your reactive button to save yourself and not being allowed to because you're on the global cooldown, which always feels really bad, even that aside, the decision to cast Light of the Protector means that you're not casting Judgment, so you're not reducing your Shield of the Righteous uptime, so you're actually setting yourself up to be less tanky in the future. Similarly with like Frenzied Regeneration, if you're pressing Frenzied Regeneration, you're not pressing Thrash, and so you're not generating Rage, and so you're not going to get extra Iron for stacks, and so you're going to be dying 10 seconds in the future because you've tried to save yourself now with your reactive heal. Your reactive healing button is competing with your proactive defenses, and that is something that makes tanks feel, squishy, and it makes it feel like those buttons are bad buttons to press because you become less tanky as a result of pressing them. So not entirely sure how to fix this one besides taking them off the global cooldown. I'm trying to, if it were up to me, I would be taking a lot of these things off the global cooldown, but I'm trying to come up with solutions here that are consistent with Blizzard's, philosophy here, and trying to come up with a way that we can both be happy. And I think that there are some ways you could do this. You could make abilities like Frenzied Regen generate Rage based on the amount of, damage you've taken in the last couple seconds, and that way it doesn't hurt your future Iron version the same way. You can make Light of the Protector grant Shield of the Righteous cooldown reduction, those sorts of things. There are just some ways that you could make those buttons contribute to your, your active mitigation in the same way that all the other abilities in the kit now do, because that's kind of the modern way tanks are designed, is that most of your buttons even your offensive buttons have a defensive benefit. So that's what I would do for the tanking abilities on this list. Fiery Brand in particular, I actually don't mind that one being still on the global cooldown, because it's, it's that one's like kind of like a big defensive cooldown. I don't mind those, like Divine Shield and Fiery Brand and Shield Wall, all those things being on the global cooldown. That's something that I don't mind quite as much. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the offensive cooldown situation. So the old problem with offensive cooldowns was that you would pop 5 cooldowns and 1 global, and then you'd macro that together, and Blizzard didn't like that. The problem is now you're popping 5 cooldowns and 5 globals, and that doesn't feel very good for players. So let's take a look at some logs here of what people of certain classes are doing, and these are some top DPS logs here. So this is an enhancement shaman log, and you'll notice, so going into this, Guardian of Azeroth, Razor Coral, which is off the global cooldown, then a Rock Biter, which just to generate some resources, Flame Tongue, Frostbrand, Fury of Air, Feral Spirit. 7 seconds into the fight, now you can start doing damage, right? 7 seconds into the fight, you can start pressing your actual fun damage dealing abilities. So I can understand that the problem before was all of these buttons being popped at once in a macro was maybe bad, but I think that this is worse. I think that this feels worse here to not be doing any damage for 6.5 seconds at the start of the fight. Here's an Unholy Death Knight log. We've got Outbreak, Festering Strike, Apocalypse, Unholy Frenzy, Blood of the Enemy, and there was a pre-casted Dark Transformation before this as well. And then again, 7 seconds into the fight is when you're actually done popping cooldowns, done with your setup, and able to actually start doing some damage. Although even then, it's still some you're still casting some Death Coils before you can actually start spamming some Scourge Strikes, which is where you really start feeling some damage there. So another case where things are just, it takes a really long time to set up. Arcane Mage, charged up. So you're like, all right, I'm ready to do some damage here. And it's, 3 minutes into the fight. And then you're like, all right, charged up, Guardian of Azeroth, Rune of Power, Arcane Power. 5 seconds later, you can start doing your damage. So I think that for me, the problem with the GCD in the state that it's in right now, with everything being on the GCD, is that there is just so many situations where you're popping cooldowns for many globals in a row. And I don't think that this is a particularly fun thing to be doing. I think that we should be getting to our damage a little bit faster than this. Maybe not one global or something, but a little bit faster than this. So how do we fix this design-wise? Obviously, taking stuff off the global cooldown would help. Like if just charged up an Arcane Power, we're off the global cooldown, that would do this. But let's assume that we need to come up with a solution that preserves not needing to make a macro here. Because that's, a Blizzard stated design goal here. I think that one thing you could do is make some of the major cooldowns cast some of the minor cooldowns as well. So like, what if when you press Arcane Power, you also get 4 Arcane charges and drop a Rune of Power at your feet, right? Like what if that kind of was all baked into that ability? This would go a long way towards fixing another problem that players have with this, everything being on the global cooldown, which is that actually pressing Arcane Power no longer feels good. You're no longer, there's no longer any damage that's done with it. Your character just, starts to glow and maybe plays a little animation, and that's it. So what if instead we baked in some of these effects into that major cooldown, and we could rebalance the cooldown on the other, on Rune of Power itself and on Charged Up itself. But by doing something like that, by making it so that, Unholy Frenzy also applies some wounds to the target or something, or making it so that, when you cast your Feral Spirits, you also enhance your weapons with Flame Tongue and Frostbrand for 20 seconds. Those sorts of things, I think, would be a really good way to cut down on the total length of time here that you're popping cooldowns without forcing people to use these macros that, again, Blizzard is against that. So those would be my solutions to the GCD in both the tank case and in the offensive cooldowns case. One thing with the offensive cooldowns in particular is that at the start of the expansion, it's usually not so bad. But as the expansion goes on, we start getting these things like Guardian of Azeroth, these Azerite essences. And I feel like it's somewhat likely to happen again next expansion where, there will be some Covenant-based ability or something like that gets added in that's an active on the global cooldown, and that further bloats how many globals there are before you get to start doing damage. So I think that, aggressively attacking this problem is something that Blizzard should look at doing, because I think that would really help make these classes feel a little more fun. I'm not advocating for a power level increase here. I'm just advocating for a fun increase of how quick we can get to doing our damage. Because I think it's a common experience that it feels clunky to be pressing all these buttons, especially when stuff like Vendetta, it's on the global cooldown. It used to be that Vendetta was really fun to press Vendetta, because then you'd immediately use your Envenom or whatever. And do huge damage. But now you press Vendetta and your character just slash points at the target, and then a second and a half later you get to start doing damage. And the fun starts when you actually press your Envenom, not when you press your Vendetta now. So I think that another way they could do this is just make Vendetta cast an Envenom, make Recklessness cast a Rampage. Make those abilities also cast an offensive ability with them as well. in the same way that, like, Metamorphosis casts something up front, right? It does a leap with an immunity frame, and it does some damage and AoE stun. So putting those kind of actual impactful effects into the cooldowns themselves is, I think, a way that will justify them being on the global cooldown. Anyways, I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about the GCD. Well, it's not that divisive an issue. This is kind of one where Blizzard and most of the player base are on two different sides of this one. But I'm hoping that we can find a solution that keeps everybody happy, and that's what I've tried to do here. So let me know what you think of them, and if you have any ideas yourself. And remember to check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos, and my other videos. I've got a video on the AoE target cap, which you may be interested in as well, on this channel a couple of days ago. And thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.